some of the examples you mentioned, inheritance is half the inheritance of men. The question itself is flawed, because not in all cases do women receive half of what men receive. That is in a specific case where a father dies or a mother dies and she leaves children or he leaves children, and the siblings, the male will receive double of the female. So it's a specific case. Otherwise, there are cases where women will receive 1/3 or 1/4 or 1/8 or 2/3 or 1/3 or the entire inheritance, meaning it varies from scenario to scenario. But so the question itself, how questions are proposed, sometimes determine how people think regarding that specific issue. In this case, the case of why the male sibling receives double of the female sibling is only because the male would have to marry in the future and pay for the dowry of his wife, and the dowry would be whatever she demands, and he would have to pay for the upkeeping of his wife, so a maintenance of his wife. So because of this, he is given double, while the daughter, she retains her own personal wealth. When she marries, she receives a dowry of her choice and she receives maintenance. She does not contribute to the household costs of a marriage. The woman does not contribute. The man must pay for everything, and this is why his inheritance is doubled. So this is just one example of how something can be cited. Another example, you mentioned the witnessing of a woman is half of that of a man. So if you have one man witnessing, you would require two women witnessing for the same thing. Is this correct? The answer is not always. If you observe, some of the rulings require two women, but some of the rulings, the woman's witnessing is sufficient and the man's is insufficient. Like suckling, the ruling of suckling, if a woman comes forward and says this child was suckled by this woman, or she suckled that child, that statement of the woman overrides any statement of a man. So it is not always true that the witnessing of a woman is half of that of a man. That is in very specific cases, and that is for a reason. The cases are in trade and commerce, that men would be more engaged in trade and commerce. Therefore, the ruling is that the statement of a man would be equal to the statement of two women. Even today in the stock market, if someone goes to the stock market or in New York, and you observe the stock traders fighting one another, you would observe that most of them are men, meaning that environment is dominated by men. Some people reject this, meaning feminists, and they would say that this is not always true. If that were not the case, to this day America has never had a female president, meaning there are reasons for this. Like military is always dominated by men. This is the way the world is running. But those things which are dominated by women, like childbirth, like suckling of a child, then the witnessing of a woman is not like that of a man. In fact, the witnessing of a woman overrides that of a man. So this, again, the question is not worded correctly. So with regard to rights of women, of course, this is a deeper issue than just the question that you've asked, because some of them will say, why would a woman have to wear hijab? The response to that is, the believing woman is addressed by God Almighty to conform the laws of Allah, which is what wearing jilbab. Jilbab is something that covers the hair of the woman and the chest and the body of a woman. But the believing woman is commanded by God Almighty. Does this mean that men can oppress women in order to enforce the hijab upon them? The answer is no. And any time we see and observe this, we will know that it's a cultural practice. Like in Saudi Arabia, the way the hijab is enforced is a cultural Bedouin practice. So the believing women are commanded to do this. and they must carry out this act. If they refuse to do so, that's between them and God. But nowhere in the Quran do you find a verse of the Quran or in the Ahadith that the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba, went around carrying sticks and beating women and enforcing them to wear hijab, or like what occurs in some tribal areas where men carry wires and beat women and enforce them to wear the niqab. Not only the hijab, the niqab, the face veil. No, the hijab is something Allah has commanded the believing women, but He has also commanded the men with certain things also, like lowering the gaze, keeping their modesty. So if men do not conform to that law, they are answerable to Allah. If women do not conform to that law, they are answerable to Allah. But men have not been commanded that wherever they find a woman who is not wearing a headscarf, remember headscarf is insufficient for covering, the command is for a jilbab, but that they enforce the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on women and oppress those women. So these are some things which are al-hukmu ala shay far'un an tasawwurihi. Any judgment on anything is always a branch, a subsidiary of how you conceive that thing. If you have the wrong conception of something, your judgment will be based on that wrong conception. So whether a Muslim or a non-Muslim, some Muslims will have the wrong conception of the hijab, like people in Saudi Arabia, where it's a cultural practice, where women are enforced to wear the hijab, when in reality the hijab is something the woman does with her own volition, with her own free will, as a believing woman, as we observed in Syria. In Damascus, the women would wear hijab out of free will, meaning that would inculcate more piety within the woman. And likewise, the non-Muslims or some secular people who have also the wrong concept of hijab. And of course, these extreme interpretations of the Sharia, and secularists always go hand in hand, meaning one needs the other in order to validate themselves. So you need the extreme interpretation of Muhammad bin Salman or the Saudi interpretation of things to validate a secularism. And this is why today Saudi Arabia is moving towards secularism, because they need the tribal interpretation of Islam that they have validates as secularism, and secularism would validate an extreme interpretation according to some Muslims, who then of course are recruited by groups like ISIS, because ISIS is a reaction to an observation of extreme secularism. But the natural Islam is the Islam, the Sunni Islam that we learn from